This channel hasn't been called a negative philosophy for no reason. It turns out that you can get a better understanding of yourself and the world by coming to an understanding of what you can't understand. It's a strange thing. It's a kind of inversion of what most people think. So the title of this is Off Limits. What I want to try and convey in this podcast is that most of the things that we desperately seem to want to know are off limits to our understanding. Because at the end of the day, we are finite creatures living in seemingly an infinite universe, and in no way can you match finite with infinite. And so we view the world as if through a kind of filter. Because we're creatures living on this planet, we're basically animals with reason. And most of what goes on within us is aimed at our own survival. It's, your body really doesn't give a damn about whether you can answer the question, what am I? And your body and your instincts and your emotions and your desires are in the main what you are. But we have this reasoning capability, a reflective consciousness that causes all kinds of trouble for us because it asks a whole pile of questions which we don't seem to be able to get the answers to. Of course, if you're a dogmatist, then you'll have plenty of answers. What am I? I am God's servant. What am I? I am consciousness. What am I? I am awareness. A whole pile of bullshit answers. There's more power in not knowing than there is in knowing, and hopefully you'll see that by the end of this. This could be quite a long podcast, by the way. So let's start off with the idea of truth. Let's get the mundane truths out of the way. So there are truths of fact: the sky is blue, the tree is green, all that kind of stuff. Mundane truths that are really just statements that relate to our observation of things, and they're either true or false. And in fact, the old definition of truth was an idea that corresponds to the reality of the thing that the idea relates to. So when I say a tree is green, I'm saying that's true because the tree really is green. Although there is no truth there, because green is something your brain creates. Green isn't something that is really out there, but that's another story. So we have these truths of fact. We have truths of logic. The old one I always give: A equals B, B equals C, so A equals C. Truths of logic. And that's it. These mundane truths are the only truths you will ever know. But of course, people throughout the ages haven't been satisfied with those kind of truths. They want to answer questions like, what am I? Is there a God? Is there a purpose? Is there an objective morality? What is meaning? What is the meaning of life? All these kind of questions which, what is being? Why is there something instead of nothing? These are the questions our minds formulate because they work in a certain way. Our minds work in a certain way. And those questions are natural outcomes of the way that our minds work. Whether those questions have any validity outside of the way our minds work is a wholly different issue. And in fact, again, by the end of this, maybe you'll see that no, those questions are just questions that come from the way our mind works. And the universe as a whole has no knowledge or insight or information on what you are, or whether there's a God or whether there's a purpose, and so on. Now Nietzsche saw this, this chasing after an absolute truth, or the absolute truths, What is reality? Some absolute truth. And people like Hegel and Spinoza and Descartes and Leibniz and a whole pile of philosophers thought that they had a God's eye view of the world. That because we live in space, extension as the philosophers called it, then space was a property of reality. And because we experience time, then time is a property of reality. And because we experience the world as made out of stuff, then stuff is a property of reality. And because we see cause and effect, then cause and effect are a property of reality. It took the smartest man who ever lived to figure all that out, but I'll get onto that in a moment. So Nietzsche said very, very wisely, or asked a number of questions about truth. He said, well, why do we value truth so much? Why are we earnestly seeking answers to these questions? What value do we put on being able to answer these questions? Now, what I'm about to say Nietzsche didn't say, but he asked the important questions. Why value truth? And in fact, he even went on to say that all the philosophers will create some system of truth that really just reflects their belief system. Spinoza did it, Leibniz did it. Leibniz, I think it was Leibniz, came out with this stupid statement that this is the best of all possible worlds. Schopenhauer proved quite conclusively that this is the worst of all possible worlds. So take your pick. They both arrived at opposite conclusions using well-formed arguments and came to different conclusions. This is the best of possible worlds, it's the worst of possible worlds. And so Schopenhauer was mainly a pessimist, as you know, I'm sure, and Leibniz was an optimist. So an optimist is going to say it's the best of possible worlds, and a pessimist is going to say it's the worst of possible worlds. And they're going to base the whole fucking philosophy around the idea that they've come up with, based on their own particular temperament and so on. And even the smartest man who ever lived, namely Kant, wasn't immune from this. Fortunately, he produced a work that was almost completely lacking in his personal biases, called The Critique of Pure Reason. And it's a springboard for thinking about all these questions. Kant went on to produce a whole pile of gobbledygook about morality, well, morality particularly, pious behavior and God and so on. And in fact, that's what most people tend to focus on. The Critique of Pure Reason is seen as a kind of springboard, but personally I think the Critique of Pure Reason is it. I think all the later stuff was him just trying to justify his pietist upbringing. He was a pietist, his parents were pietists, so he wanted to show that there is some good in the world. Anyway, so Nietzsche asked the important questions. Why do we value this truth? Well, the horrible fact is that we value these truths because we want to assign some meaning or purpose to our life. Our egos cannot bear the notion that our lives are without purpose or meaning. I mean, they just don't like it. So we're suckers for any old cock and bull story. And that cock and bull story might be very sophisticated, like Hegel or Spinoza. When I talk about these people in this way, I'm not dismissing all their work. I'm just saying that they came out with things, dogmas effectively, that do not stand up to a rigorous interrogation. So Spinoza had an ontology, an idea that God was everything that exists effectively, or God is everything that exists. plus the force behind it. Well, how the fuck do we know that? So Nietzsche said, why value it? Well, we value it because we want to be important. It's the bottom line. So when we ask a question, what am I? We're hoping for some answer from somewhere, from some old spiritual text or from some new age bullshitter. We're looking for some kind of material that will say, you are part of the universe and you are very important. This is why people like that desiderata, produced by some monk somewhere. You know, you're a child of the universe. Oh, I'm a child of the universe. That means I'm important. Is there a God? Well, you know, very often people ask that question because they want a big daddy in the sky that's going to look after them. I mean, the seeking may be more sophisticated than that, but very often it's just variations on that theme. Is there purpose or meaning? Well, people ask that because, again, they want to be important. They want to have some meaning to their lives. And finally, is there any objective morality? Well, again, they want some kind of framework for life that means they don't have to think about stuff. They just want it laid out on a plate. And of course, you know, religions are very good at offering all of this, which is why a lot of people turn to religions. And I'm not knocking it. If it helps people get through their lives, that's a useful thing. But let's not pretend that it will ultimately satisfy, because it doesn't. If we buy a whole crock of shit, then sooner or later we're going to see it's like that, or we're going to keep buying into it and investing more and more and more into this crock of shit. And maybe we become neurotic, unhappy, depressed. You know, lots of stories I could tell about that. People I've known who've bought into the traditional, well, the usual Christian story. There's more to the Christian story than the usual one, but the usual Christian story, the usual Buddhist story, the usual whatever. And they end up neurotic, maybe having nervous breakdowns, all kinds of stuff. But that's another topic. Anyway, the reason people want to know all this stuff is because they want to be significant. They want significance. Now, as I've mentioned in other podcasts, the ego is nature's crowning achievement. Why? Because if you have an ego, and most animals don't seem to have an ego in the same sense that human beings do, if you have an ego and you believe that you're something and that you're important, you are going to strive even harder to continue with your existence, because you don't want what you believe you are, this character you become, this personality, you don't want that to disappear. And so human beings have developed very strong senses of personal identity, which animals don't seem to have. Sure enough, they're always going to be fearful of danger and all that kind of thing. They still want to survive, but they haven't got this machine in their minds churning away called an ego, which is saying, oh shit, you've really got to do this because you need to have this in 5 years' time, and let's plan this out and let's do this, and so on and so forth. The ego is a magnificent creation, and the engine or the fuel for the ego is anxiety. If the ego isn't creating anxiety, you don't do anything. Anxiety and fear. So the ego is a massive achievement in terms of evolution. It's not very useful for individuals that have egos because they're frightened to death of dying or becoming nothing, which is why understanding what we are, while it may be painful, it's actually very, very useful. So you have two alternatives. One is to buy into some dogma, and the dogma may just be, oh, I don't think about those things. because I think when you die, there's nothing. That's a dogma. They don't know that. The atheists are just as dogmatic as the Christians or the religious people. They don't know what death means, whether there's any residual kind of sense of being or whatever. Probably there isn't, but who knows? There are plenty of people who say they know, and there's a very ready market for people who do that kind of thing, because people they want reassuring that when you die, yes, what is real within you will continue to exist, whatever that means. So you buy some ready-made dogma, and that ready-made dogma might be something as kind of revved up as the Gurdjieff work, or it might be something like Buddhism. And the Zen Buddhists got it more. They understood, and I can't remember the name now, but one of the most prominent figures in Zen Buddhism said, if you see a Buddha in the road, kill him. There are no ready-made answers. If you're buying all the ready-made answers, then you might as well buy into materialism, into making your life's goal acquiring as much stuff and earning as much money as you can, or having as many sexual conquests. Because you're buying into dogma, a belief that this is the thing to do or the right thing to do. And there's a whole kind of, there's loads of bizarre spiritual stuff. The 7 rays of creation and all kind of bullshit like that people buy into because it gives them a sense of meaning. And while I'm sounding like I'm critical, if people want to do that, that's fine, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to understand the structure of our own organism, not just physically. In fact, the physical side of it doesn't interest me all that much. But from the point of view of our minds, how are our minds structured? And I referred to the smartest man who ever lived, namely Immanuel Kant. And he kind of got to the bottom of it. And he said, essentially, we are constrained within our sensory perceptions and the way that our minds work. We believe that the way that our minds work is the only way that a mind can work. Thinking one thing after another. Not being able to think 2 things at the same time. Seeing the world as comprised of objects. Seeing the world comprised of numbers of objects. Seeing different kinds of qualities in objects. We think that that is the only way to experience the world, because we experience it like that. It's the ultimate egoism. And so what Kant did was he laid out the way our sensibility works. It works in space and time. That's not a property of reality, it's a property of the way our mind works. And he figured out, more or less, it's not, people argue about it, it's not 100% accurate, it doesn't really matter, the principle is the thing that matters. Our minds have a structure, and here are some of the structures. He can't label 12, there might be 15 for all we know, there might be 6. But, he had a good shot at it. The important thing is that our mind does have a structure. The reality that you can think about and experience is your reality. It's not the reality. So, you live in a world that is defined by your own sensory capabilities and by the way that your mind can think. You can't look beyond that. If you get the sense of that, it's very humbling, because all of a sudden your pretensions to knowledge about God or purpose or what you are or whatever, or morality, all those things drop away. Those things are off limits. Think about them if you want, but when you're thinking about them, just remember that you are thinking about them in the only way that you can think about them. And there is nothing in the whole universe that says that your thought is in any way thought that can comprehend reality. It's thoughts that churn along in compliance with the structure of your mind. So, all those questions that bug you, first of all, you have to understand the driver for them. You want significance. And then you have to understand why those questions cannot be answered. Because you live within a well-defined framework. It is defined by your sensory capability and the structures of your thought processes, which have nothing to do with the real world. They're just your thing. So ultimately, where does all that lead? Well, it leads to a very nice state of affairs, in my opinion. Of course, people who can't let go of the fact that they have to have some grip on reality when we don't have any grip on reality will find it distressing. But for me, it signals the end of striving, of asking questions that cannot be answered because we do not have the data, and besides which we are within our own little prison cell and we can't peer outside the window. All we can do is have a good stab at trying to understand the structure of the prison cell. That's the best thing we can do. And once we've done that, we can understand, oh yeah, well of course I can't know what God is or whatever, because I don't have a God's eye view of the world, so how could I possibly know? I've just got my own little view, defined by all these structures that the mind uses and my sensibility. So, stop striving, relax, and float downstream.